Why the Jews were expelled from Western Europe in medieval times? Because they were poisoning the wells, or maybe they were kidnapping the children, or desecrating cemeteries. No, it was not true. In fact, people envy them their wealth, because no one was able to lend money in medieval times with interest. Only Jews were able to do it, because Christians had their own principles, and Saint Thomas from Aquin said that money cannot breed money. So lending for interest was a sin. And later, medieval church also recognized lending money for interest as a sin. The same was in Islam, where Muslims were not allowed to lend money on interest, and even today a lot of Muslim banks are not lending money for interest. So if all competition was out of business, Jews were only one who can lend money for profit, and it gave them enormous riches. It is obvious that lending money, as in medieval times, as today, is a very good way to accumulate enormous wealth. So, when they were so wealthy in medieval France, Spain, England, Germany, Christians living in these countries were very upset with them, because they were very rich, and people don't like people who are richer than them. And what's more important, Jews were the one who made sin of lending money for interest. And also they come up with other ideas, like they killed our Messiah and they are spoiling the wheels and so on, so on. So they kicked them away from England, from France, from Spain, from Germany. And all these immigrants, these Jewish refugees, came to Poland and to Lithuania, to the one country in Europe which was tolerant for them and which had this very strong Slavic sense of hospitality.
It is also worth noting here that Lithuanians had to learn tolerance quickly, as in 14th century they created a great empire in the east, in which they themselves were a minority. They constitute no more than 15% of the population, so tolerance for Orthodox Christians, Muslims and Jews were among them common.
And what's more important, in Poland we always had a weak king who was unable to stop Jewish demands. For example, Casimir the great Polish monarch in 14th century, was a man who inherited very weak state after his father, who miraculously was able to reconstruct the state after the very long, almost 200 years long split. And Casimir, although very great monarch for Poland, was very needy for money, and Jews was one who can come up with money for him, so he gave them a lot of privileges. So they expanded their influence in Poland.
However, in exchange for privileges from the king, the Jews had to renounce the high usury they received in Poland, which reached up to 200% per year. Under the agreement with the king, they could now collect no more than 52%.
And later, after Casimir, the Piast dynasty ended and new dynasty came, Jagiellonian dynasty. But the Jagiellonians were in fact kings who were elected among the family, so they were also not very strong, and they also were eager to expand Jewish prerogatives in exchange of money. And later in Poland we have the period of kings who were elected outside of Jagiellonian dynasty after the dynasty ended in the end of 16th century. And therefore the Jewish influence in Poland was bigger and bigger.
For example, in 1618, Polish king Sigmundus III Vasa banned writing bad pamphlets about Jews.
And in 17th century, for example, in present-day Ukraine, which was under Polish control, Jews were the most important economical power who served as merchants, as managers of great estates owned by Polish and Lithuanian and Russian nobility. And these nobles hired Jews to conduct business for them. So the middle class in present-day Ukraine was Jewish mainly, and they exploited the poor Russian inhabitants of present-day Ukraine, and Cossack uprising in the middle of 17th century was mostly against Jews who exploited economically this Russian population, these Orthodox Christians who lived there, and these nasty Jews were very strict and were trying to get as much money from them as they could. So have this in mind if you think about medieval Jews and why they were expelled from other countries in Europe and why they came to Poland and seated there to the end of 19th century. Because at the end of 19th century, when Poland was dead, Russia, Germany and Austria splitted Poland into three parts. Jews were still living there, but in the end of 19th century, Russians decided to also kick them out from this territory, and they all migrated to United States of America, and that's why we have today a lot of Jewish inhabitants in United States of America. Thank you for listening. It was Ziemowit about history. Please subscribe to my channel and see you in the next movie.